Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name's Dan Lizette. This is episode 134. Got a unique show with a unique guest to tell you all about this week. But before we do, I want to take a quick moment and thank some super important people to the show. That is, of course, first our Patreon supporters over on the Patreon site. Folks supporting the show for as little as $1 a month or more. I greatly appreciate each and every one of you, as I like to mention up front every single week, because it really means a lot to me that those of you who've done so have taken just a moment to say, you know what, big fan of the show, love your work. Here's just a little chip in to help out. Also like to thank this week's show sponsor. My friends from Podbean continue to be awesome and continue to support the Podcast Digest. So this week's show is brought to you by Podbean. They offer podcast hosting and monetization. It's the easiest way to start podcasting. If you go to podbean.com/TPD, you'll learn more about them and you'll get your first month for free. And I'll tell you more about Podbean in just a little while. But now let's get to our conversation. This week's interview with Bart Warshaw from Kismet, a super interesting show, highly produced, although it's short in length. That just means it's really easy to catch up if you have not yet subscribed or checked out Kismet. Really encourage you to do so. What Bart and his team here have put together with the show is, I think, required listening. And the guests he's had so far and the stories he's told have been really, really interesting. And I think this conversation was also very enlightening in terms of all that's gone in to make this thing happen. So without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Bart Warshaw from Kismet. All right, folks, we're back. And as I mentioned up front, my guest this week, host and founder, producer of a very new show with a very new twist. Something that if you're not listening to, you definitely will be surprised by what you hear, I think. So Mr. Bart Warshaw from Kismet, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining me, and I'm really interested in talking about what you've got going on here with Kismet. So we're going to jump all into that, but before we do, as has become my tradition now, I like to ask people about their lives and their stories a little bit before Kismet even started. So if people don't know who Bart is, can you give them a little bit of the backstory?
Sure, yeah. Well, I am obviously British from the UK, so I hail from the London area, and my backstory really is that my dad was a musician and I was always involved in music for many, many years. And so naturally, after I sort of grew up a little bit, my inclination was to go towards composing. And that's really where all of my production work starts. I sort of gigged around London as a songwriter, and I went to LA for a short amount of time to do some composition with film there, and then I just wanted to do composition for anybody and anywhere. So I when I moved to New York, what was it, 6 years ago now, roughly 6 years ago, I just started emailing everybody and started doing composition for toys and commercials and anything I could find, and one of the things that sort of kept my interest as time went on was working for a small radio station called B-Box Radio. It was an online radio station, and I just did a podcast with a guy called Paul Lazar, who's an actor, and he was just interviewing his friends, and that really was where my start, at least in New York, was for podcasting.
So I'm curious, New York in the first place, was it just the idea to kind of take the songwriting and the composing to the next level, and you thought New York was a place to do it?
In some ways, yes. My now wife was in New York, and we were doing a long-distance relationship for many years. And
that was my second guess, was a significant other, yes.
Yeah, it became important that one of us had to jump across the ocean, and actually my father hails from New York, so I had the easy route of using my dual citizenship, so...
Gotcha. Well, marvelous. So you get to New York, you're working with the radio station, and you get exposed to podcasts at that point. Take us from sort of that minute in time to sort of the idea germination for Kismet.
Well, from that moment, I mean, that really was very early on when I was in New York. And even before that, I'd actually been involved in podcasting. before I moved over to New York, about just a year before, I got my friends round to my house and I'd cooked them a meal, and I said, guys, I've figured out what we should all do, because we were all pretty lost at that point. I said we should start a radio station, and they were like, oh, that sounds expensive. and so one of them suggested, why don't we just do a podcast? And we started doing a podcast, and we created a very small network. It was actually called Skylab FM, and it was our baby for a while. And I had a few shows on there. One was about bread making, which I was obsessed with at the time. And my friend had a sort of ambient noise contact mic podcast, and then we had a sort of general music thing, and then sort of iTunes decided that the music thing was pretty illegal and
yeah, they don't like that. They don't like that.
And so that was really where I started in the podcasting thing, and then so after I hadn't moved to New York and I set this other podcast up, I was really quite heavily involved just in my composing until about 18 months ago, when I saw an advert for a company doing something that sounded a bit like Startup and Gimlet and their sort of endeavors. And it was called Narrative, and they were doing, they were trying to start a new podcast company. And so I started working with them on helping them to introduce some new shows. And their first show was called Memory Motel, which ran. I guess it's still running. The first season ended just before Christmas, and so that was really, I sort of really got heavily involved over the past 18 months, and that was really where Kismet also started, because they were sort of running around ideas, and then I'd come in one day with this idea in my head, and it was based on these columns that I'd seen back in the UK of exactly what the show is about. It's about how we met, how people met. And so there were these columns in the Guardian on Sunday and the Independent on Sunday of just very simple stories of whether it's comedians or lovers or friends, and about how they met. And that idea came and just seemed like a natural progression into an audio form, at least at that point. And they were very excited about that idea. But I think it just didn't happen. So it kind of germinated there and then never really got anywhere. So when it came to, later on in the year, later on in 2016, I was just itching to do it. And so I actually went to Union Docs and did a podcast course just to sort of freshen up on the sort of business and the other things of, the other sides of podcasting, and started it pretty much after that.
One of the best things about Kismet, I think, is one of those ideas that once you start to listen to the show and you start to see what you're doing, the thought is out there, why didn't I think of that? I can't believe this is just now existing. It's one of those things that's like, this is the perfect sort of combination of storytelling and music, and just pops a light bulb in people's heads as, of course, this is great. I'm wondering, though, when you felt so strong about this concept, is there something personally that sort of, did you have a story yourself personally in your past that was maybe meeting or interacting with somebody that you thought this would be a great story to share?
I don't personally. I mean, one of the things that struck me specifically about the columns was actually that I had a couple of friends that were in this Guardian column of how we met. And I was kind of fascinated by that. And I always was, for some bizarre reason, I was always fascinated to those columns. And when the idea came up that this could just be an audio form, I was just like, wait, somebody must have done this before.
Right.
And I searched and searched and searched, and nothing came up. And it does seem like one of those things that just should definitely have happened. And so that's really what kept nagging at me. Like, why hasn't anybody done this? And that's exactly why I did do it, because it was such an obvious thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I sort of think, like, in the audio genre, podcasting, public radio, whatever you want to look at, audio storytelling at this point, it seems like And you mentioned some from your kind of first launch network there. There are podcasts out there about just about everything, or so you think, but kind of diving in a composition style way on how people met didn't really exist. And it's like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you, because it's like, this seems so, I don't think obvious is the right word, but such a natural fit.
Right. And many people have done it in the past. It's just never been collated, into one space. I mean, I can think of episodes now just off the top of my head that people have done about how people, or at least, the start of the episode is about how they met.
Right.
And that format exists. It's not like an original format. It's just that it's, where we want to take it.
And I also, and it's also where you guys are. That is the core of Kismet. Is sort of saying. Of course, there's obviously a ton of stories and podcasts involving how people met, but usually that is setting a backdrop story to some other element that's being highlighted. So you've got this idea, and you decide to basically talk with narrative and say, hey, about this idea we're discussing, I want to get it up off the ground. And so how does that start? How did the early weeks and months of this Kismet project take shape?
Well, honestly, I mean, at the point that I started it, the company we were sort of closing in on season 1 of Memory Motel, and I was freelancing there, so I was doing Kismet on the sideline, and really it was just like I went to Third Coast Third Coast Festival, and started shopping the idea around, and everybody seemed to be like responsive, and so I kind of just started interviewing people, and took it from there. And some of the people I met at Third Coast, were very helpful, and suggested some producers and some people to work with, and so I got a small team to just get things running, because I didn't think I could do it as swiftly as I wanted to on my own.
And I wanted to ask you about some of those team members, but you mentioned Third Coast in 2016. I did not know that this was a significant contributor to the launch of Kismet, because it reminds me you're the second person now in the last couple months I've talked to that attended Third Coast last year, and a show came up out of that. If my memory serves me, episode 126, I spoke with Sam Sabin in her new show, Good Grief, and I believe she went to that same festival and also launched her show afterwards.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had gone there, and I'd known what I wanted to do, but it was just a sort of confirmation, at least at that point, that people were responsive. I knew what I was going to do, and I spoke to people with that intention, but it was just a confirmation that it was something people were interested in.
I'm really thinking I need to get to that thing. I've heard great things about it. I'm assuming you enjoyed the experience of attending.
I did. It was there was some fun, in the radio world, like, those are my heroes. That's what it is.
Excellent. I got to put it on the short list, that's for sure. But okay, so coming out of Third Coast now, this thing starts to take form, and you mentioned you started talking to some people to help put you together. I wanted to mention that because you've got them on the websites and in the show note credits, but I want to talk about sort of what your decisions were on what you felt you needed to sort of complement your skill set, and how did that team assembly come together?
The team assembly. So I emailed some producers who I had worked with or hadn't worked with, but I sort of met in the past, and I respected their work, and they kind of suggested some people who were great, and I met with them, and I didn't interview anybody else, because I was really just at that point really needing some help just to get things off the ground. I needed somebody to go out to get tape, somebody to just come up with some additional ideas. And some people just to help start cutting some episodes. And so everybody's skill set is slightly different. Excuse me. But a lot of it is organizing. Organizing what schedules happening. who to email next, who to contact next. There's social media to set up. There's all these things when a podcast starts that you just don't even think about. I'm writing press releases. I need somebody to double check the spelling and the grammar and things like that. And those are the people who I rely on the most to do those things.
So I'm looking at the website here, Bart, and you've got Zoe Saunders, Danny Lewis, and Ryan Swikert. Is that correct? As we stand today, this is the team, plus yourself, of course.
Yeah.
So take me through sort of kind of the launch process, or maybe, the week in, week out. How do the four of you sort of share the load and work? You talked about people going out and getting tape and things of that nature. What does the production process look like?
So a few months ago, we're talking at the end of 2016, really. We sort of got together on a weekly basis and we started pitching ideas to each other. At that point, I'd already had, 4 or 5 or 6 things, if not in the can, like very close. And then we started pitching each other ideas. And when it came to a good idea, I was just said, go for it. Like, let's find the people and interview them. And so really the sort of process is I'm there to sort of be the guy to sort of be responsible for saying yes or no to various episodes, and then people come back to me with tape or with full edits. Ryan produced the second episode, which is called Dust, and he completely did that on his own, and it's amazing.
Yeah,
episode.
Great. Yeah, I want to talk about a few of those. That was a spectacular one.
Yeah. So it completely depends on the level of involvement. All those guys, Zoe's got a full-time job. Danny's got, Danny works on Morning Edition at WNYC, so he's up crazy early, and so he's got a full-time job. And then Ryan's a full-time student as well now. So they've all got like a lot of other things going on, and so this is really part-time, like freelance stuff for them. Me, I'm sort of spending a lot of my time right now focusing on getting interviews, getting Kismet out week to week.
So you mentioned you had some in the can already, and at the time of this recording, there are 4 out there available for folks. By the time you folks are listening to this, maybe a couple of more. And I'm curious because you're kind of all over the ways people intersect category. You've got people connected through friendship, people connected through romance, people connected through medical issues, and so on and so forth. And it's a great array of kind of eye-opening different ways that people's paths cross. So when you were, it would have been easy, I guess, is what I'm thinking, that stick with romantic. There are hundreds of millions of stories, but you've chosen not to do that. You're kind of going into sort of all different ways that this happens. I'm curious, sort of the thought process behind all that.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely deliberate. The romantic story, we can get a million of them,
right?
And some of them are absolutely outstanding, but most of them are probably the same. Honestly, most of them are the same in some way or another. And I don't, so far the episodes have been actually very positive, but I don't necessarily want to just be telling positive stories. And the romantic ones would pretty much necessarily be positive. So again, back to the sort of origins of the show, where I saw these How We Met columns was, comedians who met each other, comedy partners and artists and dancers and things like that. And that's where I saw the value of the show much more than necessarily just romantic. That's not to say that some of those romantic stories are so sweet and so phenomenal. Some of them are absolutely phenomenal. And which is why, the first episode was sort of very deliberately put in place. Here's a romantic story. This is what you would expect a show like this to put in place every week. But actually, here's a romantic story, and then next week we're going to do something completely different.
Yeah, that first episode really delivered too. That does sort of set that oh wow standard, because it does sort of take that, yes, it's romantic, but you may not have heard a romantic story like this one. You know what I mean? Like this is almost rom-com category where most people dismiss that as that doesn't. Most people, especially people who've maybe struggled in love or relationships, will watch a rom-com and be like, "Well, that's the movies. It doesn't happen in real life that way." Well, here you go.
Right. Right.
So how do you find these folks? Let's take Love Train, episode 1, which is a great place to start, by the way, folks, obviously. How did you find Morgan and Nathan?
Well, the idea came once I told the idea to a few friends of mine. One of them came back to me and was like, I've got a great story for you. And he put me in touch, and it was a great story, obviously.
Yeah.
That one actually was the first one I'd done. I'd done a couple of others, sort of trying to figure out the style and the aesthetic, and just trying to figure out what it was. But that really was the first episode where I was like, okay, this is going to be a real Kismet episode.
And let me interrupt this conversation just for a quick moment. Folks, you've heard that music. Now it's time to talk to you about this week's show sponsor. That's Podbean. Podbean back again supporting the Podcast Digest. So my thanks to them. Podbean is podcast hosting and monetization. It's the easiest way to start podcasting, folks. When you sign up with Podbean, whether you are a new podcaster or bringing your show over from another host, there are any number of awesome features that you can expect to receive as a part of the Podbean family. They're going to set you up with an awesome looking website. You can customize it with different themes and colors. When you publish your show, you're going to be able to share it out to all the social media accounts that you could possibly think of with some quality embeddable players. If you've already got a website, that's okay. They can integrate those players and the posting into your own website. Of course, all the RSS and iTunes support you're going to need to import your show and redirect it if you're coming from another host. You can set it up and have an actual application, an app. Everybody knows what an app is. It is a big thing in the podcasting world, so that you don't have to explain to people about how to find your show, what the podcast player is, Everyone knows how to download an app. Well, you can have your own with Podbean for both Android and iOS. You're going to be a part of their online directory and potentially have some opportunities to be promoted right there on the front page on Podbean. They feature all kinds of different shows, and they support and announce those featured shows through their social media accounts. You're going to get all the comprehensive podcast statistics you could possibly want. Podbean's got them all. Where your listeners come from, when do they download, all that fun stuff. And when you're ready to take your show to the next level, Podbean's got you covered there as well. They can offer you the ability to designate certain episodes or special content as premium. You can participate in their advertising platform that's super easy to use and straightforward. And also you can receive listener support directly via their integrated patron program. All of those services are available on Podbean. In fact, if you go to podbean.com/TPD, you'll learn more, and you'll get your first month for free just for using that code. Tell them you came from the Podcast Digest. So definitely check out Podbean. My thanks to them for supporting the Podcast Digest. Now, back to my conversation with Bart. What are those conversations like when you approach these subjects? When you try to, especially for the first one, where you try to explain what it is you're trying to do and for lack of a better term, convincing them to go along on this ride with you?
Yeah. I think that they were so, Morgan and Nathan, they are such open people anyway, and they've been so kind to me. I actually interviewed them twice just because I was scared the first time that I didn't get all I needed, but I actually did get all I needed in the first time. But the conversation was, their story was so strong that I just wanted to record it in a slightly different way. I think from a composing background, I think they were sort of aware that I wanted to do something that wasn't just here, just tell your story. We can get it down and it's in audio form forever. Like I wanted to do something that was like more elevating, and certainly on my perspective, all the shows need to be more of an audio arts piece than just a story piece.
This leads me directly into something I really wanted to talk to you about, Bart, was that there's almost now, even this short amount of episodes in, to me, if you haven't already, you are in the process of developing a very succinct style. I could almost have your voice in the title pulled out and just start to listen to the story, and I could almost identify it as Kismet at this point. And one of the reasons is, and one of the most unique things, listeners, that you will hear when you start listening to Kismet is the way that this story is told, in the interweaving, in the back and forth, in the advancing of a narrative through two separate dialogues. And I'm just wondering about, again, sort of the decision making for that, and how do you do it, basically?
It's actually a lot of work.
I can imagine. That's what I'm thinking.
It's a lot of work. It's the stories tell themselves, but really what makes it really exciting is that once you have two people telling that same story, for some reason, like that, you seem to grab onto it a little bit more, because you're curious about what the differences are and the similarities, and what they say the same, and how they interacted with their memory differently, and that's really what's fascinating about it, because it's just naturally, at least from my perspective, a gripping way of getting through a story that could be potentially quite mundane, but for some reason it holds my attention. And then, a lot of it really is moving a lot of tape back and forth and doing tiny, tiny edits. I often go through the whole, hour-long interview for each of them. They've each got an hour's interview, and, slice every tiny bit up until it's squished into about 20 minutes. And then, only then, can I start figuring out the actual structure of each episode.
It's almost like switching channels, maybe, and each channel has two different people telling a similar tale, and just kind of going back and forth, and not in a chaotic, hectic way, but almost where or like a car swerving on a road. I'm thinking like you're on this side of the story, and then you come back to this side of the story and pick it up from there, and it's super unique. And it was one of the first things that jumped out at me when I started listening. I'm like, wow, this is. It's very common nowadays where you hear a narrator interspersing with an interview guest. Radiolab does it. 99% Invisible does it. It's a very established sort of approach now. But where you're taking two interview subjects and sort of doing the same thing, but not with you, the narrator, but with each other, that's where I think it's a unique listening experience.
Yeah, and I've thought about this before many times, because when I've done other non-narrated productions, and it's kind of difficult once there are more than two voices to really get a full idea of where the story is going, because you're confused by more than one voice unless you have that narrator. And personally, I've just never wanted to be a radio narrator guy. That's just not me. So that's just not what I wanted to do ever. That's why I sort of went into composition rather than as trying to be a singer-songwriter, because I never really liked the stage. I never really wanted to be the focus of attention. Well,
to whatever degree you do choose to narrate in Kismet or in any other place, you I'm sure you're well aware, you do know Americans love the accent, right? So I don't think anyone would object to more Bart. I don't think that's going to be the issue. So this massive process. So I'm curious, on any given episode, what are we talking here? If I had to pin you down to sort of an hour range, what are we talking? 6 to 8, 10 to 20 or more hours in production on, because these are very consumable size. We're looking at what, 15 to 20 typically in length?
Oh, less. Okay. I mean, we actually aim for under 10 minutes, but I always seem to go a little bit over. They are short. But, those short things do take a lot of time. I have managed in the past to get an episode down to like a single day. But that is really kind of rare.
That's not the norm. Yeah.
That's not the norm. I would say it really takes a good 2 days or 3 days to really... I mean, really, really get it nice and sounding great.
So after you're finishing that editing process, you've got to take, I'm going to guess, like, I don't want to talk to these people for at least a week from hearing their voice. You need a little break from those folks after this process, I can imagine.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I haven't listened to the episodes really since they've come out.
Wow.
I haven't actually at all.
Because you only heard them 1,000 times in production, so you know.
Yeah, I think I know them.
You know what's out there
pretty well by then. Yeah.
So, music. Obviously, with your background, music was going to play a huge role in it, and it certainly shines through as well. What's the process in selecting, composing, however the music comes together? What's the music story with Kismet?
So the music story is that I really, really wanted to be the guy who composed all the music. I really did, but I just couldn't. The first episode I did compose it because I had, a few months to think about it, and it was really just a pilot, and so I was not even there. But the rest of them, we have a library that we use, and it's just about getting the right thing. I mean, I want to be able to. Each episode is so different that it's a reason for me to be able to explore and look for new and interesting types of music to tell the story. Really. I've done lots and lots of music supervision in the past for other shows, for videos, for films, and really it's just an extension of composition. You have to know what works to tell the story. Yeah.
Is this part hard because of your background? Are you very picky, or does your background make it easier to come up with this stuff?
I would say it's easy. For me, at least. I know what's wrong when it's wrong. At least I think I do. That decision is not really something that I take time on it for sure. But I don't think it's something that I agonize over because I find it natural. Yeah.
Well, big thumbs up to the selection so far. It almost, I don't want to say it plays a character in the story. I think that's too strong an overstatement, but it certainly sets the mood for the story, and it's always seemed to fit perfectly with what's been out there at the time of this recording. So,
thank you. Well, I mean, it is something that I know that I'm more inclined to use more music than less, but I have to be. I have to be aware that that's what I like doing. So sometimes I have to pull myself back a bit.
No, I think there are so many things in such a bite-sized package, if you will, with what you're doing with Kismet, to me, that just stand out. I really think that you've hit a home run in so many different ways. And one other element that I've got to talk about, because this is the one that maybe people might notice first. Folks, if you're hitting the link in the show notes to subscribe to Kismet, and if you haven't done so already, do it now. One of the first things you're going to notice is some pretty flippin' awesome artwork here that I wanted to ask you about, Bart, because it's episode based and it's brilliant. How did that come about?
Well, it was just kind of strange. I mean, by the time we did the artwork, I was just agonizing, trying what's the best way of just describing intersecting things in a modern way. My wife is a designer, and so got to the Denver airport after going, I think it was Christmas time actually, and I was thinking she was saying, oh, maybe you need these sort of color intersecting things, and I was like, oh, what about ink blots? And she was like, yeah, you could do ink blots. I was like, ink tests where ink is spread out over a page. And suddenly I was like, wait a sec. Rorschach tests are the only way this can work. This is exactly what needs to happen, because they tell two sides of the same story, but there's subtle differences in each side, especially when it comes to using color. You can mirror something identically on Photoshop or whatever it is, but if you're doing it live and doing these what are pretty rudimentary kids type Rorschach tests, you put some paint on one side and squish it to the other side, they look similar, but there's always differences on each side, and that is like the complete idea of what Kismet is.
It's perfect. I love it, and I hoped that would be the explanation, because that's exactly what I'd hoped. Put the thought behind that, because it's exactly everything. And what's even more interesting is that, and maybe this is just sort of, the purposes of that test, to kind of see what you see. But at least for me, looking back at these previous episodes, I can almost see the topics. You know what I mean, in terms of how they're, like episode 2, Dust, it kind of looks like a storm, like a tornado type thing, right? And then the episode 4, Double Knees, that's the one based on the wrestlers I want to ask you about as well. You kind of got, in the bottom left, bottom right, kind of an angle that looks like a knee, it's and maybe that's just me doing that and assigning that, but it's so neat to have that in as again another part of the story.
Well, they're definitely assigned for sure. I got people over. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was not long, not too far before we launched, and we just had some dinner, had some wine, and just got the paint out. It was me, Zoe, and Ryan, and started and my wife, and we just started making these things, and so I said, have a think about what your show is, this episode is about, that you're working on, and stuff like that, and choose the colors that you think would be appropriate. And that's what we did. So it started there, and some of them were complete failures, and I've got a bunch of them that are definitely no good. But some of them came out really nicely. And then once we made 20, 25, we decided which ones would be for which episodes.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. I don't know what it is, but it's perfect. It fits with the show. It's beautiful. It pops off your iPhone. I know when I listen to an episode, I look down and I'm like, oh, look at that, and it's a neat thing. This may be getting a little too, over the top here, but seriously, when you're listening to the story, take a minute or two and just look at the album artwork, and you're going to start seeing that story inside the album artwork. It's so cool. I think it's great.
Well, just on that sort of note, the whole show is deliberately simple, there's so much to do beyond just the podcast and just the artwork. Like, there's so much to do in this whole scheme, just even for 4 of us, that I wanted to make it deliberately simple, because it's unsustainable otherwise. This industry, it's so difficult, and you can do. There are so many podcasts, at least out there, who do so many things. But what I wanted to do with Kismet, in terms of the art and the composition and the style of it, like, if I didn't make everything else simple, then it wouldn't happen.
I can completely appreciate what you're saying, Bart, but I have a feeling that, and this is a pure compliment, that most listeners coming to your show are not going to have simple as the takeaway. It's clear the editing that goes into these episodes is tremendous. The interweaving of the stories, and even that artwork, it's being created on an episode by episode basis. And so it pleases me to know that it is the goal is simplicity, but on the other end, at least from an audience perspective, I think folks are going to recognize this as supremely well thought out and highly produced, and I think that it will have a successful review. It will be remarked upon as something not so much as simple. but okay. I can appreciate is what you're saying, though.
Okay.
And like I said, I mean all that complimentary, for sure. I want to talk about a couple of the guests, a couple of the episodes. You had Brittany and Eric from Four Color Nerds, and I was a huge sampler listener. Obviously, it was right up my alley in terms of what I do. I met Brittany once at Podcast Movement in Chicago last year, 2016, very briefly. And I'm kind of curious. They're obviously fairly big shows, fairly big names in the podcasting space. How'd the working with them come about?
Well, actually, so when I did this Union Docs course, that was sort of a refresher for me, Brittany came to speak, and I think I tweeted at her afterwards, thanks for coming to speak, and I think I sent her a message on Twitter saying, would you like to do the show? And she said, of course, that sounds great. And then it took, probably a couple of months of me pestering them a bit, and getting a bit of time from them. But they were, and Eric, I don't know if you heard his episode, The Deacons. But
no, not yet. I saw it linked in the show notes
incredible.
there.
I mean, that was I don't know what it was about that episode, but that was an incredible episode he produced for what is it, Undone, the show Undone, also a Gimlet show. But yeah, great.
You know what? I think I have heard it. Then I was looking through the show notes of the episode, so it reminds me when you said that, but I did not catch that was Undone. You see, your show notes say The Deacons from Gimlet is also on iTunes. I didn't know that was a part of Undone. I think I've listened to
that then.
Yeah, I think I listened to all of Undone before it got done. I know I was subscribed, and I remember listening to I may have to go back and re-listen on that one, but I'm pretty sure I've heard that.
Yeah, it was great. It was really good. So I'm a big fan of both of their work.
Yes,
so yeah, I mean, I just got them.
Yeah, it was a great story as well, and I've heard they had a show predated For Colored Nerds, didn't they? When it was just the two of them?
I'm not sure.
It was either For Colored Nerds was the first one, and it got picked up by the bigger network later, or they had an original. But I remember her telling kind of how this started story in Chicago. So it was really interesting to hear, especially told in your way, in the Kismet Group's way, how that all began. So. Yeah. And then episode 4, the most recent time of this recording, Double Knees, which was with Colt Cabana, who many podcasters may know, but also Grotto. And Grotto's got another great accent, by the way. Yeah. That was awesome.
It's Grado, just so I don't get...
Grado, sorry, Grado.
Offend him in any way. Yeah.
I don't think I want to offend that guy either, to be honest with you. How did that one come about?
That was Danny. I don't know how he found them, but Danny found Colt and Grado, and he reached out and he got those interviews. And then he did a sort of quick edit, but I sort of did the final production on that. And those guys, I mean, that story is incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, from basically fan to friend, which is kind of everybody's dream who's ever really idolized somebody in any sort of celebrity style space. The idea of ever meeting them is usually so far afield, but to actually end up working with them and calling them a friend is pretty cool.
Yeah.
It was.
I can't claim to know. I mean, Colt and I have been emailing each other about sharing it on social media and stuff like that. But other than that, I can't claim to have found those guys. I'm actually kind of in awe of Danny about doing that. But I think that Colt Cabana, at least he told us in the interview that he's always checking his emails and his social media because he's such an active guy and he's always doing something, that I guess that you can just email him and he'll respond.
Well, if you haven't met him yet, I have a feeling that's not going to take too long, because I know he attends a lot of the conferences. He was the presenter for the awards at Podcast Movement last year. He emceed that, and I know he's out and about in the podcast circuit very regularly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's so many great episodes, and that's not even, we only mentioned in passing a little bit episode 2, Dust, which might be the most emotional, if you will, in terms of in-depth meaning behind that story. And one of the reasons I don't want to talk about it too much is I really don't want to spoil that one for folks.
Right.
That's definitely one of those ones. And then we talked a little bit about Love Train, which is just that off the movie screen type of story. Everything out there has been spectacular. I'm curious, what's the feedback been like so far?
We've had some great feedback. I mean, everybody, the feedback on at least on iTunes in the reviews has been fantastic. I've been sort of wrapped up in just the launch so far, so I've been obsessively checking numbers and stuff like that. But the feedback has been great. I couldn't have hoped for any more than what we got. Yeah.
Are people pitching you stories yet?
People are pitching me stories, but I want people to pitch me stories. We only have so much capacity for finding them, and I want those stories that really should be told on Kismet to be told, because there are It's a funny thing because I want the small stories that are just intimate and personal and just sweet, but I also want those ones which are just incredible and really the best form. Really that Kismet can be the best form to get them out for.
And folks, if you've got a story, there's a link in the show notes to Kismet's website. There's a contact tab, an email, stories@kismetpodcast.com, and a contact form on that page as well. So if you think you've got one, reach out to Bart and Company, and maybe you'll be featured on a future episode.
Absolutely.
Speaking of future episodes, I'm curious. What have you thought about the future? Are we looking at a season-based format? How many episodes in the current season are we looking at? What sort of are you projecting out?
So I've committed myself to 18 episodes for season 1. And now, whether that continues afterwards is completely dependent on the success and continuation of what we can do. This is, completely self-financed. So it really was sort of out of love for the art and doing the show. But I can't continue to do that forever.
Right.
I'd like to, we've got a lot in the can, and we still have a few slots to fill in before 18 is done. So there are a few slots for news stories if people are, wanting to submit them. But 18 is where at least I want to think about the next season and where it can go. I think it could be continuous, but that is completely dependent on its successes, and maybe somebody wants to sponsor us.
I was going to say that gets into the business side. So where are you with that? I'm assuming, obviously, you'd entertain the concept of a sponsor?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on some of the bigger networks?
I'd love to be part of something bigger. This was just we've just started, so those conversations are just coming in. I always knew that I wanted to start before thinking about being part of anything bigger. But I, in the same way as those original How We Met columns in the newspaper I don't think they were every week, but they were regular. I think it would be great to have Kismet as something regular that's featured in some magazine or even on its own as part of a network. I think that would be great.
Yeah, I can see it. I mean, you're up there in the Northeast. You're in Gimlet's backyard. You are a lot of Radiotopia presence up there as well, WNYC, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It would not surprise me to hear down the road that something were to happen. And I think any of those organizations, if they're not already looking at what you're doing, I think they will be very soon. And I've been right before. I talked with Megan Tan from Millennial 2 months before she joined Radiotopia. So I think what you guys are doing out there is absolutely phenomenal. I'm happy you said 18. I was hoping you wouldn't say 8 to 10. 18 sounds awesome. That means we're all in for a great ride coming up with what you guys have.
We've got a couple of months left. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. If folks want to check this out, and they must, besides all the links I'm providing in the show notes, go ahead and tell folks, Bart, where can they find Kismet website, subscribe, socials?
Yeah, we're really great. We're really lucky to have found Kismet Podcast everywhere. So we're on Twitter, Facebook. I think we're even on Instagram, and the website is kismetpodcast.com.
Awesome. And they can follow you?
They can follow Kismet Podcast, and they can follow me if they want. Yeah, I'm at Bart Warshaw.
Awesome. I've got links to all of that in the show notes, folks. I say this every week when I talk to folks about you wanted to check this out. This is probably the easiest ask I've ever asked of you guys, because as Bart and I discussed, these are very short episodes. This is a very short investment to get a taste of what we've been talking about, and I strongly encourage you to do so. This may be one of those ones that you were like, yeah, I was listening back when. I'm telling you. Bart Warshaw, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much.
And folks, that'll do it. That's episode 134. What'd you guys think? Did you like it? Do you think that Kismet is pretty cool? I do. If you like this interview, like this conversation, please share it with a friend, tell a friend, leave a review in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever you listen to the Podcast Digest. Tell a friend, right? The recent, from a few weeks back, hashtag tripod. What does that mean? That means tell a friend about podcasting. And whether you recommend the Podcast Digest or not, that's fine. But at least tell people about podcasting. If you enjoy this on your commute or while you're doing the dishes or while you're walking the dog or just lying around and you enjoy these conversations, tell a friend about them. It would really be great. Tell a friend about Kismet, too. In fact, you want to know more about some of the shows that I've featured, there is 133 other episodes in the back catalog of the Podcast Digest with some great conversations with some wonderful hosts and producers, and I really think that you will enjoy it. So check that out as well. Before I go, one more time, thanks to my this week's show sponsors, Podbean. If you're thinking of starting a podcast or looking for a great home for your podcast, if you go to podbean.com/TPD, you'll get your first month for free if you sign up with this special URL, so you can try all of Podbean's great hosting features. Again, my thanks to Podbean. That'll do it for this week, folks. Until next time, my name's Dan Lizette with the Podcast Digest.